This is an extreme spoiler warning for what is going to follow in this video. In it, I discuss at length for over 26 minutes everything that I believe brought me to the conclusion that nobody, or the majority of people, are not responsible, as Hannah Baker says in the TV Netflix original show 13 Reasons Why, for her death. Ultimately, the majority of the things that happened would not, despite the fact that we know that teenagers' minds do work differently and they take things a lot more to heart than maybe a lot of adults would. A lot of adults would have not reacted the way that she did to some of the more minor things that happened. Obviously, it was a snowball effect that ended up leading to more serious things happening. But I'd just like to issue this spoiler warning so that people know that I'm going into at length the reasons why none of the people, the majority of the people other than one person really, was responsible for her, was responsible for her ending up feeling that she needed to take her life. And there were other things that she could have done instead of taking her life. So now I've had a chance to process what I watched over 3 consecutive days. This is my updated review of 13 Reasons Why, based on the book by Jay Asher, the Netflix original series. Thank you for now. Bye bye. Hello. So I've done a few videos recently about the Netflix original show based on the book by Jay Asher, called 13 Reasons Why. And I've been watching some other videos by some other YouTubers and processing why I think that some of the people that she blames for her ultimately taking her life weren't actually directly responsible in any way for her ending up, as she does in the show, cutting her wrists. The first person I'm going to talk about is, she went on a date with a guy called Justin, who she only went out with because her friend who moved away, who probably feels incredibly guilty for saying this, told her that it was okay for her to go out with this Justin guy. Now, this Justin guy did a bad thing when they were on the date and took a photograph of her. It wasn't a very flattering photograph at all. Obviously, I've found out that the book somewhat differs in perspective, etc., from the TV show, but we're going to talk specifically about the Netflix TV show. So it wasn't a very flattering photograph, and yeah, he did a little bit of the brotherly bonding thing with his friends that he was on the basketball team with, and showed them this unflattering photograph. But I don't think he specifically stated anywhere in the episode that he reached third base with Hannah, whose name is actually Hannah Baker, not Anna Walker, as I previously stated in a video. I made an error on a surname there. And I have been coming at this from the perspective of feeling emotional about the content of the show. But despite the fact that it was wrong for him to take this photograph, and that it was on his phone, it is actually another character who is way more disgusting a character, who decided that he was going to share this photograph around the entire school, which how this Justin had the entire school's phone numbers, or how it was depicted in the show is if he had the entire school's phone numbers in his phone, that he was going to somehow share it around. Maybe it was shared around on social media somehow. Obviously the other main protagonist of the TV show, Clay Jensen, saw this photograph as well, and he said some hurtful things that hurt Hannah's feelings. But how I've come to understand it is that it's this guy Bryce who was friends with Justin. But come to realise later that their friendship changes. But this guy Bryce, who goes on to be an incredibly disgusting character in the show, we're only going to cover certain episodes here because we're covering Justin and the fact that Justin wasn't actually to blame for the photograph going round. Yes, it was wrong for him to take the photograph, but he didn't share it, and Hannah is mad at him for it being shared around, because she believes that he told people that he got to third base with her when he didn't actually get to third base with her, and the rumours are further contributed to later on in other episodes, specifically by a girl who in the show is called Courtney Crimson, who, I'm not being funny or anything, but she is a closeted lesbian who has a same, two fathers, but Hannah and her share a drunken kiss in the TV show. In the book, apparently, they're massaging each other, and the whole point of Courtney being at Hannah's house is that Hannah is, in this particular episode, being stalked by a guy called Tyler, who's a photographer for the school's paper, but they don't know it's Tyler at the time, and they share a kiss, which I think Courtney initiates in the show. But the problem is that Hannah is angry at Courtney for continuing to cover up her sexuality despite having two fathers. Hannah does not have the right to be angry that Courtney is not ready to come out. Okay, along the same lines of Justin, she doesn't have the right to, as they say in the show, throw Hannah under the bus and add to the rumours about her going to third base with Justin, which is not something that Justin said. Justin didn't say that he went to third base with her. They just assumed that he was saying that. So when they've discussed it, and Hannah's basically held Justin responsible. So Courtney, being a lesbian and not wanting to be out as a lesbian, and so adding to the rumours, yes, that's wrong, but Hannah doesn't have the right to basically try to force Courtney to come out as being a lesbian to all the people in the school. She doesn't know how difficult Courtney's parents, her two dads, would have had it, because she clearly doesn't know any of the people that she blames in the tapes that well. Obviously, the rumours that end up being spread around that is caused by Bryce sharing the photo on Justin's, they led to another guy whose name I can't remember right now thinking that Hannah was easy and saying so in his episode, but that isn't his fault. If Bryce is a dickhead, which we should know how much bigger a dickhead he is later on, and they shared a photo on Justin's phone that maybe Justin shouldn't have taken, right? That isn't this guy's fault that he thinks that he's basically fallen for this belief that Hannah is so easy and sleeps around because Bryce has basically made it so this rumour could be spread, and Courtney didn't help by reinforcing it to cover up her sexuality. What the guy who takes the photographs for the school newspaper did was wrong. He shouldn't have been stalking Hannah, but along the same lines as Clay, he was actually in love with her, maybe not in as nice a way as Clay was. It was more of an obsessional stalking love, and he was taking candid photos of her in her house and stuff like that. So he is in the wrong. But when we later learn more about this Bryce guy and what this Bryce guy does, the problem is that Justin gets mentioned again later on in the tape, because Hannah unfortunately gets caught in the situation after having shared a kiss and nearly going up further with Clay. She's in this room at this party, this Jessica's party, who she already fell out with because there was a list that went round, right? These lists go around schools, whether you're hot or not and stuff like that. So she's holding this other guy called Alex, who was going out with her friend Jessica. They all made friends and they went to this place called Monet's, which was a coffee shop. So they were all like this FML group that complained about their lives to each other in a coffee shop. And then Alex and Jessica started going out. Now, in the tapes of what Alex was supposed to have done, Hannah says that Jessica and Alex stopped hanging around with her at this coffee shop, but Jessica later on insists it was the other way round. So we don't know the truth of those things. But the thing is, Jessica slapped Hannah because she thought that this hot or not list, right? Alex was mad because Jessica would have sex with him. So he did this list or whatever that basically said that Hannah's ass was sweeter than Jessica's to make Jessica jealous. Jessica for some reason came to the conclusion that it was Hannah's fault that Alex ended up dumping her and everything, and that this list was a contributing factor. She can't hold somebody responsible who even tells her that she had no idea that the guy had dumped her and didn't know anything about anything that was going on. Whether or not she was the one who stopped going to the coffee shop and hanging around with Jess and Alex isn't the point. The point is that she has no right to be mad that the two people started to like each other. It's high school. Kids start to like each other, right? And this is why I've initially said when I've spoken to people that some of the reasons she gives why she ends up killing herself are stupid. Yes, a photo got shared around. Yes, a hot or not list got written up. But those specifically aren't good reasons, and the people that she blames for those, that's silly. She can't blame Jess or Alex or the guy who went on the dollar date, the dollar Valentine with her for it. Predominantly, it seems to come down to this Bryce guy. This Bryce guy seems to be the main real reason. Like, if you cancel out all the stalker photographer guy and the closeted lesbian and the blonde guy who was going out with her friend and then split up with her friend and her friend slapped her in public because she thought it was responsible. If you cancel out all that and come back to this Bryce guy guy is a disgusting piece of work, right? And Hannah, in the tape about what happens to her friend Jessica at the hands of Bryce, seems to think that she obviously didn't see this from this perspective, but we see through the characters being expanded throughout the show that Justin, who was actually Jessica's boyfriend after Alex, did actually come back into the room where a sexual assault happened from Bryce on Justin's girlfriend Jessica. Now, Hannah had been in the room previously with Clay Jensen, and they were going to do something that then, because she was flashing back to how the guy from the Dollar Valentine and Justin and how she felt that they treated her, because she flashed back to all of that, she ended up telling Clay to naff off basically. So what ended up happening with Jessica being in the room, she was going to initially be fooling around with Justin, but then Justin left the room and Bryce came along, and then Bryce went in there and Hannah ended up having to go and hide in the closet. So she wasn't actually looking, she was mostly hearing things. Now, she will have been aware that somebody else came into the room, but not that that was Justin. And Bryce basically shoved Justin back out of the room, right? And Justin was sat on the floor outside the room, crying, drunk, not knowing what to do, terrified, while Bryce proceeded to sexually assault his unconscious girlfriend. Now, different versions of events that happened in later episodes whereby whether or not Jess was actually still unconscious or not, but this is the first incident of, well, the second incident of Bryce being responsible either directly or indirectly for something, right? Which not only is responsible for sharing the photo around the school of Hannah in a compromising position on a slide in the park on a date with Justin, he then also goes on to be an incredibly disgusting man by sexually assaulting, or we'll say the proper word, raping Jessica while she's unconscious, right? So, Hannah didn't actually say anything to anybody, and she obviously feels incredibly guilty that she didn't tell anybody, including Jessica, who was her friend from the coffee shop, who she'd fell out with, obviously, because of what happened with Alex, right? She didn't tell Jessica, and she didn't tell anybody that she was in the room. She didn't tell anybody until she'd put it on the tapes. But how she said things, how her interpretation of the truth of what happened, like, because it's expanded in the show, we actually see that what she saw and what was happening wasn't the full story. It wasn't the full story for any of them. But then we go on to that neither her or the character that's known as Sherry in the show, who gives her a lift after she's seen this sexual assault of her former friend Jessica, neither of them actually, they don't really do anything to report properly that they've knocked this stop sign over. She doesn't tell Sherry, who's Jenny in the books apparently, that she's seen this sexual assault, so she's not telling anybody. Obviously she's in shock and she's feeling numb that she's heard what she's heard. She didn't see the whole load of things, but she does throw up after she's heard what she's heard and everything in the room. But basically they knocked this stop sign over, this wooden posted stop sign, which later on leads to the death of a character that isn't apparently in the books at all, who apparently is a close friend of Clay Jensen, who's listening to all these tapes. So, yeah, basically, because, Hannah does go off to try and make a phone call about the stop sign. She just, obviously at this point, she isn't aware that there's been an accident, a person that doesn't exist in the books anyway, right? But she doesn't even, when she's on the phone to 911, when she's finally got a phone, which she borrows from a guy in a shop, state that she's witnessed a sexual assault or anything. So obviously she's just going to feel guilty that she's not reporting it to anybody, and she should have done, because we later to go on to find out, after a bunch of other things have happened, that she has an argument with her parents because she loses this deposit money from the shop that they run. But she ultimately ends up I think a few weeks before she ends up taking her life, she ends up at this Bryce guy's house. Now, we already know from the previous episodes that Bryce is a disgusting guy who, from Hannah's point of view, and from what Justin knows, sexually assaulted Jessica. So she knows that this is a guy that sexually assaulted, that raped somebody when they were unconscious. Now, she's not thinking straight by this point anyway, because of all the smaller things that have happened with her kiss with Courtney and being stalked and all these other things that have a detrimental effect on you when you're a kid in school. When we used to leave school at 16, when over here in England, but in America they stay on to school, which I think is by our school system, kind of does it now, so you stay till you're 18. It basically, she goes to this Bryce's party, and ultimately she ends up in her underwear in the hot tub with Bryce, who, when obviously I've skipped over some things that have happened, but ultimately she ends up in this hot tub and left alone with this Bryce that she already knows is a rapist. She doesn't intend to end up there. I understand she doesn't intend to end up there, but she does end up there, and she's ultimately basically raped by the disgusting piece of filth. And even at this point, she doesn't actually tell anybody. It seems like she goes a week or 2 weeks or whatever. It's undetermined in the show how long she waits. But then she goes and sees Mr. Porter, who's one of the school counsellors. Now, having watched the episode and having processed the episode, I don't think that she's right to criticise even Mr. Porter and ended up taking her life that same day that she's seen him. I do believe that even though he didn't follow her out of the room like she says she expected in Mr. Porter's tape, that he didn't try. He did explain to her that if she's not willing to give the name of this disgusting piece of filth, and he talks to her for about 20 minutes according to what I've seen from another video, and tries to draw her out, and she says that no, she didn't say no, and she explains to some degree that she didn't say that twice. She didn't say no, basically, and she's not willing to give the name of this guy that she already knows has raped somebody, right? So ultimately, it seems that she's holding responsible people in the school and takes her own life and leaves those people feeling guilty, up to the point that in this episode we don't know whether or not Alex, who, I skipped over the fact that there's a guy called Ryan who is previously a boyfriend of a guy called Tony, shared this poem, this intimate poem, but specifically in his episode that she blames him. He doesn't actually tell anyone. I mean, the people that were in this poetry club that her and this Ryan went to know that it's her poem, but none of those people other than her and this Ryan go to that school, so they won't know that he's printed this poem in his magazine that he passes around the school. Nobody who's in the school knows that it's her poem. He doesn't break her anonymity, right? But she goes after him in the tape and stuff for having put it in his magazine, and ultimately becomes part of the story of one of the reasons why she kills herself. But ultimately, the major things that would have actually caused her to kill herself is whatever guilt that she would have felt that she didn't tell the police about him. I mean, she even leads to Sherry, who Jenny in the books, in the TV show, in the Netflix show, she ends up going to tell the police that this guy died because they'd knocked the stop sign over and stuff. But these people really, when I've had a chance to process it, all aren't really all that responsible for Hannah killing herself. Not even Clay, who didn't really do anything. He might have made some mean comments based on what he saw. He saw the photograph of her on the slide as well, so he might have said some things that hurt her feelings, but most of what happened to her, apart from her being raped and having seen her or heard somebody who was her friend raped and stuff, none of these things really were anything that she couldn't have told Mr. Porter, the school counsellor. She could have said that it was her poem that got printed and opened up to him and said that ultimately the only things that were really leading her to feel like she didn't want to be alive anymore is that this guy who should have some comeuppance, this guy who shares photographs from other people's phones and assaults other people's girlfriends and shoves that person's boyfriend out of the room so that he can sexually assault an unconscious girl, and then thinks that he has the right just because someone shows up and who's had an argument with a parent. I mean, obviously he doesn't know that she has an argument with her parents, but by this point she's already feeling isolated and lonely and friendless, and he thinks that because she showed up and because she was in her underwear that he has just as much right to rape her as he did to rape an unconscious Jessica who was in her own bedroom. It led to to Jessica having been drinking, and it isn't until the last episode that it looks like she's going to tell her father that she was raped. But ultimately, I've come to the conclusion that Hannah taking her own life isn't ultimately the responsibility of the majority of the people that she blames. It's not the responsibility of Ryan or of Tyler, the photographer guy, or of anybody really. Ultimately, I'm not going to say that suicide is a selfish thing, but ultimately when she makes that choice after not answering Mr. Porter's questions and reacting the way that she does when he says that he doesn't see that she has any other choice if she's not willing to give him a name and everything, right, and to let him talk to her parents about what's happened to her. She's not willing to give the details that he needs so he can do something to actually help her. Her truth on the tapes isn't the truth as it's portrayed in the books. Apparently, it's done over a night. But ultimately, what she does when she ends up cutting her wrist in the TV show, she takes pills in the books apparently, is her own fault. Nobody else's fault. No, none of the stuff that, even the rape, she could have gone to the police. She could have told Mr. Porter, and they could have gone to the police, and they could have spoken to her, and Bryce could have been locked up for the sexual assault, for the rape of 2 people. But she didn't do that. And she ultimately ended up taking her own life and then blaming everybody else. So I do agree with the things that I've seen on other videos. Now, as emotional as I found the show, like she didn't need to do what she did. Anyway, I've talked for nearly half an hour about everything that happened in the show and pretty much spoilt the show now, so I'm going to go without doing the whole please like and comment and subscribe and share thing, because you know. But thank you for listening to me go on for 26 minutes, and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.